But this is a cycle where it looks like there's quite a lot of late spending, and we're not going to know the total spending correctly until well after the election. So the place I do worse in that prediction is on the spending. The other thing is I said there's this good candidate, bad candidate. How do I measure what a quality candidate is? I could do it in a completely circular and tautological way and say the winners are good candidates and the losers are bad candidates, but that's no good. I'm trying to do this in advance. And the cheap, easy to record thing that I use, that most political scientists use, is anybody who's ever won an election anywhere is a good candidate. Anyone who's never won one is a bad candidate. And in that sense, you can immediately think of lots of reasons why that's a stupid way to measure candidate quality, but it works pretty well. In historical election models, you get a plausible kind of estimate of what's the effect of having held an elective office on your candidacy. How many extra votes do you win by virtue of being a good candidate in that sense? In a year where there's a really strong anti-incumbent sentiment, people are angry and eager to throw the bums out, and there's a sense that there's a really edgy electorate, that might be a worse variable than it is in other years. It might be that portraying yourself as a previously elected, experienced politician is not the right way to get an extra surge, an extra boost in support. So although I think that it's a perfectly good measure, I worry about it in some years, and this is a year where I think that quality candidate measurement is probably worse than usual. So those are reasons why, if you're unhappy with my claim that it'd be something like a 50-seat Republican gain, you can latch on to, well, he doesn't measure spending that well, and he's got a pretty poor measure of candidate quality, and so maybe there are two reasons why he's erring, and he's erring in the same way, and the Republican prediction's too high. Suppose you don't like political scientists much. Most people probably don't. You wanted a prediction. You still want a seat-by-seat prediction. You don't want to just trust the betting markets. Well, there is a set of pundits out there, Charlie Cook and Larry Sabato, who actually is a political scientist, but mostly they're journalists, Rothenberg and others. And now lately the baseball statistician Nate Silver, who have websites where they make seat-by-seat predictions. Mostly that's qualitative. Charlie Cook just talks to people on the ground. It's his job. He talks to people in every district. He talks to a lot of people, Dems and Reaps, independents, everybody who's sort of got an ear to the ground. Tries to figure out which candidate's got a good campaign running. He looks at the money and other things. But it's he's not doing statistical analysis the kind I'm doing. And then he puts predictions out and he updates them constantly. And if you've been watching Cook's predictions, he's over the fall gradually upped his predictions for where the Republicans can gain House seats. So you might prefer that kind of analysis, and there's a lot of people doing it. And then there's one other key ingredient. There are polls. There are tons of polls for Senate races and governor's races, statewide polls. For U.S. House races, there are fewer, but there are a lot of people in the polling business. And for the tighter races, there are lots of polls, even for U.S. House districts. When you get down to state legislative districts, it's harder still to get polls that aren't done by the campaigns, and you have some reason to be skeptical about those polls, if only because they don't have to release them. They release them when they like the results, not when they don't like them. But so I mentioned Nate Silver, the baseball statistician who's sort of wandered into politics. He's got a prediction for every district. He uses polling data. He uses some qualitative information too. He's very cagey about what he uses, unlike most of these political scientists who go to conferences and show you what their model is, so you can pick it apart. His is his proprietary secret. He won't tell you precisely how he does it. But so lots of people making predictions lots of ways, and everybody seems to think the Republicans are going to do very well. That's not the hardest thing in the world to predict. It almost always happens in midterms that the president's party loses. The president's a Democrat. Democrats expect to lose. They did really well the last two cycles, so we're sort of waiting for the pendulum to swing back. They hold a lot of seats that should be hard for them to keep. The president's popularity is middling to poor. It's not actually horrible, but it's poor by historical standards. It's a little better than Bill Clinton's was in '94, but it's not the kind of presidential approval that would suggest that Obama's going to have coattails to protect incumbents who are Democratic incumbents who are in tough seats to hold. So all of that sort of fits together into a common narrative. What's the wild card? Well, I was supposed to be talking about the Tea Party, so the Tea Party is clearly one of the wild cards. We already saw a lot of surprising results in primaries, and not all of them, but many of the cases where there's a surprising result in a primary are places where there was a lot of activity by people who are embracing the Tea Party label. And mostly, but not always, Tea Party favorites beat established incumbents or people who even the parties would have preferred. Delaware is sort of the most obvious now, the Delaware Senate race. Michael Castle, former governor, former representative, a Republican, a moderate Republican, who was thought to be a pretty easy Senate winner, lost to a political neophyte who has a colorful background and has produced an ad to reassure people that she's not a witch. But she doesn't look like a quality candidate. She hasn't held elective office before. She's ostensibly made some goofy statements on the campaign trail. And she's polling way behind, and it looks like this might be the case where the Tea Party effect was to put a Republican into the nomination who can't win, so that they've actually, so who does the Tea Party help? Well, most people would say it's, by and large, it's an energetic group which is not part of either party, but most people on the Tea Party who self-describe themselves as Tea Partyists prefer the right and are probably voting for Republicans when it gets to the general. But they've already had an impact in the primary, and some of that impact cuts the other way. Delaware is the most obvious case where probably the effect of the Tea Party energy that put O'Donnell into the nomination is it's going to cost the Republicans 1 Senate seat. One particular thing I think about that race that struck me as interesting is Castle acted like an incumbent and a candidate who's ahead and tried to ignore his challenger. Incumbents don't like debates. If they can get away with it, they don't debate. They have to be bullied and pushed into debating usually. They would just as soon campaign without acknowledging there is a challenger. But I think the huge mistake Castle made is he mocked his opponent, O'Donnell, for financial trouble. In a recession, an awful lot of voters have had trouble with their finances. He treated her as someone who can't even handle her own finances properly. Well, I think that resonates with people right now, by people thinking, oh, I'm having trouble with my finances, and here's this guy who's got a secure political job and has made a long career in public office, and he's making fun of someone for not being financially shrewd. She sounds like my kind of candidate. She had endorsements from Sarah Palin. She had a Tea Party tailwind. But if I had to pick one thing Castle did, and hindsight's 20/20, that strikes me as a big goof, it was this picking on her for financial trouble. It was probably exactly the wrong thing to do in this year. All right, so, well, what else can I say about Tea Parties? If you just Google Tea Party right now and try to read blogs and read articles about who they are, first of all, there's not a lot of political science research. It's new enough that political scientists and academics are really slow to get our act together. All the papers we have about Tea Parties will be published around 2014 after they go through peer review, slowly grind their way through journals. But there's a lot of blogging, and it's not hard to find two completely different narratives. One of them is, this is what makes democracy great. It's people who are really upset about government, that are very unhappy about public finances and too much spending and out-of-control debt. And in particular, they're trying to be the nation's conscience in financial matters and not allow current incumbents to spend, and shift the debt onto future generations. So they call themselves Tea Partyists in the spirit of the Boston Tea Party, those colonists that threw all that tea in the Boston Harbor long ago to try to, not actually initially to get independence from Britain, but to get the British Crown to grant Americans their due rights as subjects of the